Peace. My name is Messiah Ramkissoon. I'm from Trinidad, West Indies originally. Grew up in between the DMV area, New York City. Spoken word poet, hip hop artist. And yeah, I'm a servant to my community for the last 17 years. I've been working with youth coming out of incarceration as a mentor, as a source of intervention via multifaceted approaches to supporting young people between ages 16 to 24 coming home from incarceration. Doing this work in DC jails, Baltimore jails for the last 12 years, Rikers Island. And so, yeah, really just here to build, man. And as a creative, it's allowed me to be in a lot of spaces that I've been blessed to really be a voice and utilize my talents to be a catalyst for change in other areas, such as founding this movement right here called Black Fathers Are Necessary, which we could talk more about later. But yeah, that's who I am.
Oh, definitely. I see you have a lot of like backgrounds in different things. First, I'm gonna touch on advocacy. How did you get your start in being an advocate and doing those type of things?
Yeah, good question. Well, when I moved to America, the United States, it was December 1994. I'm the son of a Rasta, right? My father, a very disciplined man, had a lot of vision, and I grew up in a household where a great part of my childhood I was homeschooled. We ate a certain way, lived a certain way. And so, the conversation around purpose and, thinking about life even outside of your professional trajectory, but really what your innate purpose is as a human being was something I feel like was embedded within me from a very early stage of my development in childhood. And so when I came to the United States, I became involved in the Boys and Girls Clubs. And so the Boys and Girls Club was very pivotal for me as a youth member there. I would spend my evenings there participating in the various leadership programs and recreational programs. And so as a result of that, they had a competition called Youth of the Year, right? And I became the Youth of the Year 1999 to 2000, which resulted in me receiving a $25,000 scholarship from Oprah Winfrey in the bio sketch on the Oprah show. And so that was really the segue for me getting to Howard University later on. But during that year, I was responsible for a lot of speaking around the impact of Boys and Girls Clubs and its support to youth in the inner cities, and why more people should be supporting organizations such as that. And so after college, a friend of the family came home from doing 11 years in prison, and he saw my voice as an artist and my talent, and he said, brother, you got a message, you got a voice, and these young people need you in these prisons, right? And he had already established his own nonprofit, going into the facilities and working with youth. And so I started off as just as a humble student, going in there and just learning from him, but also utilizing my voice as a poet. And we had a really strong impact on the young people who were the most, I would say, deep in, right? As far as, on that far edge of the spectrum that needed that real conversation and intervention. And that's where the movement really started molding for me even more in what we call an advocate for community and someone who really became, consistent on the front lines when it comes to young people. And, so it started from just real life experience, man, I would say. But before all the experience, it really, I would say, the seed was planted in the home. So, yeah.
Okay, well, that's amazing. Actually, it's very interesting to hear that you have like a strong background, especially with the youth and everything. I know that the last 4 years, especially with COVID and a lot of political issues going on, there's
Yeah.
been a lot of protests and a lot of change going on, especially within the African American and Caribbean community. What guidance or advice would you give to young people or anybody just starting out within their advocacy journey with protesting or just bringing out their beliefs?
Man, I would say first, stand firm in what you believe in. Sometimes you may feel lonely in the journey. It's not always popular, now it's becoming more of a thing where people are capitalizing off this energy. When you talk about Black Lives Matter and that movement, it's now trendy for someone to become a brand ambassador or someone to get a sponsorship or for a company to really show that they are along the lines of diversity, equity, and inclusion just by putting Black Lives Matter sticker on the window, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're invested in black issues or black struggle, right? So I would say that we have to really take a stance and stand firm in what we believe. Also connect with like minds. You know, there are a lot of great people who are in the movement, and it takes the spirit of collectivism. So with our work, you know, we're part of different steering committees that are really working towards policy reform in different aspects of the work, not just providing direct services, but really taking a stance around how we're looking at the trajectory of young lives 10, 15, 20 years from now, and how policy and different forms of intervention, even in that space, can affect change. So I would say really surround yourself with the like minds. It takes solidarity when you're making a change, but it really starts with you really having a value system that keeps you rooted to whatever it is that you're advocating for and believe in. And there are going to be times where it's not all good. There are going to be times you're going to be challenged. There are going to be times where you're going to be faced with adversity, right? You got to be built for that, you know. A lot of people love the story of Jesus, but they don't understand the battles that, you know, when you talk about rocks being thrown at you, right? When you talk about somebody said foxes have holes to live in, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. You know, you think about, activism now has become very quote unquote sexy. And that's not always the reality. So I think when we look at some of our freedom fighters like Malcolm, Martin, Harry Belafonte, some of their stories and what they had to go through, it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of tribulations, a lot of bruises on the battlefield, right? But the reward is knowing that you might not physically live to see the outcome, but once that seed is planted, young lives are coming up who will inherit that energy, inherit that motivation, and keep that mission pushing forward. So also be very mindful about involving the youth and giving them spaces to learn, to grow, because, like I said, the change doesn't just happen with the person in the mirror. You got to think about how you're planting seeds to really continue that movement even when you're no longer here. So the leader should never be a person. The leader should be the agenda, because if something happens to the leader, we don't want the movement to die. You know what I mean?
I know we touched on it, and I did a little bit of research, and we've known that you've worked in Rikers. Is that somewhere you still go back to and advocate today?
Yeah, so I work as the associate executive director of a nonprofit called Youth Justice Network, and we were actually founded 34 years ago on Rikers Island as the first organization in New York to focus exclusively on young people coming home from incarceration. At that time, the services were more adult-based services. So while it was still legal for young people under the age of 18 to be locked up in an adult jail, it was nothing to focus on them when they came home. So quite naturally, they were coming home to face more time or even worse consequences. So yeah, I deal with more the strategic planning and community partnerships and fundraising aspect of the work, some of the policy aspect of it now. But I'm still one foot in the trenches. I'm still in Rikers. We still have an advocacy team that's in Rikers every week who we manage and support to go in there and provide the services for the population. I still have someone who goes in every week and provides creative writing workshops for young women. A lot of people don't know that women incarcerated a lot of times least supported than the men, even though they're disproportionately, smaller. When you talk about percentage-wise, who's locked up, they get overlooked because they're so much smaller in percentage, but the needs are very much heightened and sensitive and oftentimes overlooked. So we have a monthly open mic for the women on Rikers, right? But our work is very holistic. We have a career services department. We have an education department. We have a department that just supports mentorship, because while the resources can be in place, it's really the mindset has to be in place first in order for the resources to be sustainable. So we really think about the work from a sustainable lens, not just getting young people attached to immediate benchmarks in a nearsighted way. We're really looking at it as far as giving that young person the tools in their toolkit to be successful independent of us, and that's really the goal of advocacy. So yeah, I'm still in Rikers pretty often, but we also have another entity that came out of the pandemic, because during the pandemic, all of the jails closed their doors to the service providers. So the young people really had nothing in the facilities, and we knew this was the worst time for them to not have access to us, so we created an innovation called Shifting Gears. So we now have a mobile bus that goes into a different borough each day of the week. We have an outreach team which attached to that, and pretty much they bring the service to the doorstep of communities that most of our youth come home to. A lot of young people may not leave their block, right, for safety issues or otherwise. So we're now meeting young people and the families at the doorstep of community while we're still in Rikers as well every week.
Oh, that's nice. I'm glad that you're bringing resources, and a lot of people don't focus on women, so I'm glad that you really specifically spoke about that entirely, because I know it's hard for people to transform what they learn inside those skills and resources to the outside community when they get home. So that's really amazing. You spoke a little bit about open mic, and I wanted to touch on your music. What type of influence does music have on your life?
A lot, you know. I mean, I'm a hip hop artist, but before I was even introduced to hip hop, coming up in my home, it was reggae was a very big thing, and the message in the music. When you think about those early artists, you know, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Israel Vibration, Jimmy Cliff, Big U, you know, Burning Spear, you know, those early artists who didn't really get the flowers, some of them that they deserve, but they set a tone as far as message that was always tied to the movement, you know, coming from the Caribbean culture. So I think that really shaped a lot of my platform and approach, even as an MC and as a poet. And then, you know, I came up in the home of my second mother, Queen Ayasudebe. She's also a performing artist. So when she saw I had a talent for creating and writing, sometimes she would bring me articles to read and say, hey, goes this article about such and such issue. Won't you write a response to it? So it began to train my mind to also be issue-oriented and tackle issues as a writer. And so, yeah, I would say that I'm an artist who is very much influenced by culture in so many ways, you know. Not just music, though. As a young fella, I was a little different in a sense. I would also be moved by revolutionaries. I just love to see strength. So people like Muhammad Ali, you know, I loved, you know, Malcolm, I used to study his speeches, you know, so even people in my neighborhood who I felt like were onto something, I was clinging to soak up all the game I could possibly soak up. So, yeah, it was a blessing, and it still is.
So in past interviews, you reflected on your gratitude towards parents being visionaries. You have a song called Black Fathers.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on the genesis of how that song, its message is regarding fatherhood in our communities?
Yeah, that song really came about. Okay, so I was going through a process where I really fell out of love with the music business per se, right? And just didn't care anything about it, and was just living life in my own way, right? As a day-to-day person who was still out there in the community doing the work, but you know, having some background in that world, I just disconnected from it. My palate no longer craved wanting to succeed in that realm. And it was a friend who, you know, does music programs with youth in the jails, and he would always see me and say, yo, what's up, Messiah? What's going on with your music? And actually that brother, he runs a production company called Audio Pictures, and you know, he was very pivotal in encouraging me to return to the studio. And so when I first returned to the studio, I was working on a project called The Eye of Freedom. And I was very precise and intentional about what topics I wanted to cover in that project. I didn't want any gaps. I wanted everything to be tight as far as conversation, no fillers, right? So I was very meticulous about that. And I thought about what actually tied to that topic when you talk about the eye of freedom, the freedom that the eye sees, but it's not always as tangible, right? So for instance, a place like Rikers Island, you know, when you look out the window, you see LaGuardia Airport literally outside. So, you know, like if we're talking like this, planes are departing and landing, we have to stop talking because they're so close to us we can't hear each other, right? So you see the world in motion. You see freedom, right? People may be going to Africa, Dubai, Jamaica, Trinidad, wherever, but you're confined in this one space. So the eye of freedom. Bring it to the quote-unquote free world. You know, you might be that child who's on your block every day playing basketball. You know, your family's from this neighborhood, but gentrification starts happening, right? But when you go home, you know, the conditions in your house are not the best. But when you look around your community, you see the neighbors coming in who are walking the dog, jogging. You know, they look like their life is great, right? They're coming from other parts of the world, moving into your community. You want to know what that life feels like, right? But you're from this block where it's not so easy to just break out that box, right? So that eye sees the freedom. You could talk about people who deal with self-esteem issues, people who deal with self-love issues, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve that may not always feel as easy to attain. So we were thinking about how to best engage that topic, and the topic around Black fathers was just personal to me. And I wrote this as someone who didn't have children yet, right? I wrote this as someone who really just been in the work for 17 years, and when they come home, they call him me, right? They call him Messiah, and they should be calling the fathers oftentimes if the fathers were there, they may not even land in prison in the first place. So I wanted to be solution oriented in my subject matter, and that's what led me to write that record, Black Fathers. So when I wrote the record, I had no idea that we would have a merch movement that would be attached to it. That really came about later, but it really started with the conversation. Yeah.
That's deep. And I do agree. It does start with what's at home,
Yeah.
and it regurgitates to what's outside. So that's a strong message. What other song would you say kind of gives another message that was sent to the youth? Like what other song close to you that has like a strong message that you can give to the youth?
That I've written?
Yeah, that you've written.
It's one on this project I just put out, the Eye of Freedom, Volume 3. It's called Coming of the Kings, and it's really just, speaking life into our process, Those of us who grew up where we grew up, it's almost impossible to live in these spaces and be untouched, right? Whether it's through your personal experiences, it's your family, we oftentimes smiling and making things look good even when it's not all good, especially black men, right? So I wanted to, and black women, and so I wanted to really give optimism, to really allow us to realize that there's beauty on the other side, and that possibility is a very real thing, no matter what your conditions currently may be. So that piece, Coming of the Kings, is actually a poem on the new project, but there's so many. I would say Stronger Together is another record that speaks really to the impact of unity and what happens when we are really more in unison versus ego, right? But there are a lot of records that I write, I think, that are really focused. I have a piece called Principles that's speaking to young people, because before you can be a king, first you have to be a prince. But what are the principles attached to arriving to that process, right? Because a lot of times we live life without order, so we're like dust in the wind. Wherever the wind goes, we land, because there's no structure there. So with young people, I think it's very important to remind them of that, the importance of that, because we live in a time where everything is microwave, instant gratification, AI, so the process is starting to become overlooked, and you just can't skip the process, you know what I mean? So yeah, as a creative, I would say I'm very mindful, but I have several, but those are just a few.
Okay. So with regards to like your Caribbean background and coming from Trinidad, is that something, like, is advocacy in music something that you have strong support with your family with? Like, do they support it to the fullest?
They do. I would say.
Or was
that,
it like a struggle at first, and then, or was it a struggle at first and then they jumped on board? Like, as far as the support
I wouldn't
is
say that.
coming?
I would say we're family, man. Sometimes you have those who are very present. I have a very big family, by the way. So you will have those who are very present, and you have those who are kind of like just in their own world. It's because they're parents and they have to keep the lights on, and everybody is dealing with their own weight and their own journey. So you have to also show grace to your people. Just because they may not always be front rows of your shows don't mean that you're not in their prayers, right? I come from a praying family. I come from a family who I know I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them prayers, man. So I would never discredit the love of my family, and also being a child who grew up in a different country far away from many of them. I think a lot of them want to be there, but they're in Trinidad and different parts of the world. So we call each other, we talk to each other. If they're going through pain, I'm still there to be that family member, to be that support, to be that love.
So I know you spoke about some projects that you just finished on. What are some upcoming projects or ventures that you're going to be working on, maybe in the summer and the fall, winter coming up this year?
Yeah, we just dropped the babies line for Black Fathers Are Necessary. So be sure to check out our page, Black Fathers Are Necessary, on Instagram. We have the website, blackfathersarenecessary.com. So we just did the onesies for the babies. I'm about to roll that out. I just put out an EP recently called The Eye of Freedom 3.0. You can check that out on all platforms. God willing, I want to launch my first book, as a published author. So that's something that I'm intentional about as a poet. And we have an event that we started about 14 years ago in art galleries called Messiah and Friends, bringing together artists. The Art Collective is kind of a Renaissance vibe that we would do monthly, so we're bringing that back. The pandemic is behind us, so we actually back to the event planning space again. So yeah, just look for me, man. We working, we building, and creating. So there's just a lot more to come.
Okay. If there's anybody within the advocacy realm or the music realm you could collaborate with, could you name two people?
Within the advocacy realm or the music realm, I would love to work with Ava DuVernay. I really respect that sister's process and her commitment to using her platform to highlight the issues that matter. And on the musical front, who would I work with? So many, so many, so many. Lauryn Hill,
Yeah, she's amazing. I heard she's
probably Lauryn Hill.
too, so.
Love to work with Lauren, but there's so many I would love to work with. I'm a child of the culture, so there are many greats out there, but she's definitely one who I think is special, and I would be honored to work with her.
Okay, so I heard you dropped a few handles. Is there anywhere people could reach you if they want to reach out to you, or any website that you want to, put on the front?
Absolutely. People can find me. My website, which we're currently updating, but it's still public, is MessiahRamkissoon.com. My IG is the same, Messiah Ramkissoon. Facebook, same thing. We also have the BlackFathersAreNecessary.com website. If you're on Instagram, Black Fathers Are Necessary. And so, yeah, you could find me in those spaces. Also, email if you guys are interested in booking for special events, bookmessiah@gmail.com.
Okay, well, thank you.